The night I found the will, I did not cry. I just laughed because they finally admitted what they had always done in silence. Then Mom texted saying it is over between us, acting like she was the one betrayed. But here is the problem. I just received a second copy of the will, and the two versions do not match. You might think this is just about money, until I opened the locked metal box hidden in the shed. My name is Morgan Reed. I sat in my sedan in the parking lot of a generic law office in Columbus, Ohio, and my hands were vibrating against the steering wheel. It was not the air conditioning, and it was not the cold. It was the manila envelope resting on the passenger seat. The bold letters stamped on the front seemed to scream at me in the silence. Copy of Last Will and Testament. I stared at the paper, feeling the sharp edge of the envelope against my thumb. My phone lit up against the center console, buzzing once. I did not need to unlock it to see the preview. It was from Linda. Not Mom. Just Linda in my contacts now. The message was short, brutal, and arrived before any greeting. It is over between us. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was only 9:07 in the morning. 10 minutes ago, I was sitting across from a man in a gray suit who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but in that room with me. He had adjusted his glasses and pushed a singular sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. The assets are almost entirely transferred to Ethan, he had said, his voice flat and practiced. He paused, waiting for me to sign the acknowledgement form. I looked him in the eye, trying to find a shred of empathy, but found only administrative boredom. And me, I asked. He did not blink. There is a clause regarding personal effects, but regarding the estate equity and the properties? No. It is all explicitly designated for your brother. I drove out of the lot, my mind drifting back to Riverstead. That small town in Ohio where I was never really Morgan Reed. I was just Ethan's sister. It was always about him. If Ethan got a C in math, we hired a tutor. If I got straight A's, it was expected and ignored. He was the golden boy, the heir apparent to nothing but mediocrity, yet treated like royalty while I was the staff. I remembered my 12th birthday vividly. There was a chocolate cake on the table, my favorite. But before I could blow out the candles, Dad ran into the kitchen, shouting. Ethan had made the varsity soccer team. My party transformed instantly. The neighbors came over to congratulate him, not me. I sat in the corner while they toasted my brother. When it came time for presents, Dad tossed me a small box he had pulled from his briefcase. It was a plastic pen holder with the logo of his construction company on it. We were busy with tryouts, he had said, clapping Ethan on the back. Happy birthday, kiddo. That was the day I stopped expecting. I started planning. By 16, I was working 2 jobs. I learned to change my own oil and replace my own brake pads because asking for money to visit the mechanic was out of the question. I filled out my college applications at the public library, forging their signatures where necessary because they were too busy watching Ethan play video games to read the forms. I got a scholarship and I left. I learned to survive without them because they had made it clear I was on my own. A memory surfaced, cold and sharp. I was 19, visiting for a holiday I did not want to attend. Mom was polishing the silverware, looking at Ethan sleeping on the couch. She had murmured, almost to herself, staring at his sleeping face with an adoration she never showed me. What belongs to the family must go to the right person. I had felt a chill then, a premonition I dismissed as jealousy. Now I knew she meant it literally. I looked down at the phone again. It is over between us. I laughed, a dry sound in the empty car. They had cut me out years ago. They had erased me from the narrative of their lives long before ink hit paper. So why send this now? Why the dramatic declaration? Unless this ending was different. Unless this time, they were not just dismissing me. They were afraid. If they had abandoned me long ago, this message changed nothing except for one thing. This time, they were terrified I had found something they wanted to keep buried, and looking at the heavy envelope next to me, I realized they were right to be afraid. People often assume that a toxic childhood requires screaming matches and flying plates. But in my house, there was no violence. There were no bruises to hide from teachers. It was quieter than that. It was a soft, organized neglect that hurt worse than a slap because it felt logical. It was a subtle, daily confirmation that I was merely a roommate in their family home, while Ethan was the protagonist. I remember scrolling through social media in my dorm room, watching my parents curate their digital lives. Facebook was their shrine to Ethan. If he finished a video game, Dad posted a status update about his persistence. If he managed to wake up before noon, Mom posted about his growing maturity. The algorithm felt like an accomplice, feeding me photos of their smiling faces at dinners I was not invited to. My name never appeared on their timeline. When I made the dean's list, the silence from their accounts was so loud it almost had a physical weight. The defining moment happened during my high school graduation. I stood on the stage, the lights blinding and hot against my skin, scanning the crowd for them. Row G, seats 4 through 6. They were empty. I later learned that Ethan had a scrimmage match, not a championship, not a final, just a practice game. I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and smiled for the professional photographer because no one else was taking my picture. Afterwards, I took a selfie with my chemistry teacher and sent it to Grandma Ruth. She was the only one who texted back immediately. I called her that night, trying to keep my voice steady. "Con, you don't need them to clap to have value," Ruth had said, her voice crackling over the line. But you need to know the truth." I did not understand what she meant by the truth back then, but I took her advice about value. I channeled every ounce of that rejection into a resume that became my armor. I secured a full scholarship to a university on the East Coast, far away from Ohio. I did not just study, I prepared. I majored in data analytics with a minor in behavioral psychology. I took electives in contract law. Not because I wanted to be a lawyer, but because I was terrified of being tricked again. I learned how to read the fine print of life. Now, at 32, I work for Northbridge Analytics. My job is to find the things corporate executives try to hide. I look for the anomaly in the spreadsheet, the ghost employee on the payroll, the slight deviation in the quarterly report that suggests fraud. I have spent 10 years training my eyes to see what isn't there. Sitting in my car, I applied that same lens to the document in my lap. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the will. It said Mark Reed. To an untrained eye, it was perfect. But signatures are like heartbeats. They have a rhythm. Dad had a heavy hand, a specific way of dragging the ink on the loop of the letter R. This signature was too clean. It lacked the microscopic hesitation of a natural hand. It looked like someone had practiced it 1,000 times, or traced it with a steady, breathless focus. It looked right, but the rhythm was dead wrong. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ethan. My heart was not racing anymore. It had slowed down to a cold, predatory thud. He answered on the second ring. "So, you finally know," Ethan said. His voice was thick with a smugness that made my stomach turn. He sounded like he had been waiting for this call, holding back a laugh. "I have the document, Ethan," I said, keeping my voice flat. "But here is the question. Why are there two versions?" There was a silence on the other end. The smugness evaporated instantly. "What? What are you talking about?" he asked. "I have a copy that says everything goes to you," I said. "And I have another one that doesn't? Which one is real?" The line went dead. He hung up. I stared at the black screen of my phone. He didn't ask where I got the second one. He didn't deny it. He just ran. That was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was a crime. I met Tessa Klein at a diner halfway between Columbus and Riverstead. Tessa was an investigative journalist for a local paper, the kind of person who saw conspiracies in weather reports, but she was usually right. I showed her the two wills. She did not look surprised. She just looked worried. Do not text about this in the family group chat, Tessa said, leaning over her coffee mug. Her voice low. If they are altering documents, they are covering tracks. Phones might not be safe. Her warning turned the drive to Riverstead into a tactical insertion. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. The house was exactly as I remembered it, beige siding, white trim, perfectly manicured lawn. But as I walked up the concrete path, the air felt heavy. It did not feel like coming home. It felt like walking into a trap. Linda opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing a floral blouse and a smile that stopped at her mouth. Her eyes were cold, assessing me like a threat assessment algorithm. "Come in," she said. We sat in the living room. She poured tea from a pot I had bought her 5 years ago. "Morgan," she said, placing the cup down with a delicate clink. "If you make a big deal out of this, well, you only have yourself to blame." I looked past her to the mantelpiece. The large family portrait that used to hang there, the one taken when I was 10, was gone. In its place was a new, high-resolution canvas print. It featured Mom, Dad, and Ethan. I had been cropped out, literally. The frame centered on Ethan leaning against a brand-new cherry-red pickup truck. Before I could comment, the back door slammed. Ethan walked in. He looked bigger, filled out with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "I am starting a logistics business," Ethan announced without a hello, dropping his keys on the coffee table. He looked at me with a smirk. "The will is fair. Morgan, I am the son. I have to carry the name. It is how it works." I did not argue. I did not scream. I slipped my hand into my pocket and tapped the record button on my phone. Under state law, I only needed one person's consent to record a conversation, and that person was me. I let him talk. Then Dad walked in from the kitchen. He wiped his hands on a rag, avoiding my gaze. "Just sign the waiver." "Morgan," Mark said. The words rushed out of him, rehearsed. "If you sign the inheritance disclaimer, everything will be quiet. We can all move on." My blood ran cold. A waiver. They did not just want to cut me out. They wanted me to legally absolve them of the theft. They had the paperwork ready. This was a script. "I need some air," I said, standing up. I walked out the back door, but I did not go to my car. I went to the old shed at the edge of the property. It was where they stored everything they didn't want to look at: broken lawnmowers, old paint cans, and boxes of my childhood belongings. I moved a stack of damp cardboard and saw it. It was a gray metal lockbox. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Grandma Ruth. I pulled it out, wiping away the grime. A piece of masking tape on the lid had her shaky, distinct handwriting in permanent marker. "For the day you are divided." My hands shook. I tried the combination. 0512. My birthday. The lock clicked. The lid sprang open. There was no money inside. Instead, I saw a stack of yellowed receipts from a bank, a silver USB drive that looked out of place among the old papers, and a thick envelope. I picked up the letter. It was sealed, but the name on the front was clear. It was an unsent letter addressed to me, signed in blue ink, Ruth Delaney. I clutched the box to my chest. They thought the story ended with the will. But Ruth had left me the prologue. I sat in the driver's seat of my rental car, the engine idling just to run the heater against the Ohio chill. I plugged the silver USB drive into my laptop. The screen flickered, revealing a single folder named Financials. I clicked the first file. It was a scanned PDF of a loan application from 13 years ago. The amount was $40,000. The applicant listed was Morgan Reed. The date stamp was from when I was 19, a sophomore in college living 300 miles away. I stared at the signature at the bottom. It was my name, but the slant was wrong. It was Dad's heavy hand trying to be light. He had forged my signature to secure a loan because my credit score was clean and his was likely ruined. I unfolded the letter from Grandma Ruth next. Her handwriting was shaky but legible. She explained that she had found bank statements in the trash years ago. Mark and Linda had used my identity to fund a renovation on the house and to bail out Mark's failing contracting business. But the part that made my chest ache was what she wrote about my brother. "I do not hate your brother," she wrote. "I fear for him. They use him as a shield. They hide their greed behind his needs." Ruth saw it before I did. Ethan was not just the golden child, he was their excuse. I marched back into the house. The air inside felt stale. Mark was sitting on the recliner watching television. I threw the laptop open on the coffee table, displaying the scanned document. "You took out a loan in my name when I was 19, I said, my voice steady. "That is fraud." Mark did not even look at the screen. He took a sip of his beer and kept his eyes on the TV. "Do not be ridiculous," Mark muttered. "It was for the family. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You were off at that fancy school, not contributing a dime. You think you are so much better than us because you got a degree. You are arrogant. Morgan, that is your problem." I turned to Linda, who was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. "I was at school on a full scholarship," I said, looking her in the eye. "I was working 2 jobs to pay for my books. Where were you when I graduated? Where were you when I got my first promotion? You were never there." Linda sighed, looking at me with that same pity she used to reserve for stray dogs. "Morgan, look, you were always fine. You are strong. You figured things out. Ethan, he is different. He needed us. He still needs us." That sentence hit harder than the financial fraud. I was punished for my resilience because I did not break. They did not think I needed care because I was competent. I was invisible. Ethan was needy. So he was loved. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped into the hallway to answer. It was Tessa. "Morgan, listen to me," Tessa said, her voice breathless. "I ran the address for Ethan's logistics company. It is a ghost. The address belongs to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. It was flagged 2 years ago in a fake invoice scheme. There is no business. It is a shell company used to move dirty money." My grip on the phone tightened. It all made sense. The will was not just about favoritism. It was a transfer of assets to a laundering front. I hung up. I had enough evidence to go to the police, but I needed to be smarter. I needed to trap them. I walked back into the living room, smoothing my features into a mask of defeat. I let my shoulders slump. "Okay," I said softly. "You win. I am tired of fighting. I will consider signing the waiver." Mark's shoulders relaxed visibly. Linda smiled, a genuine look of relief washing over her face. "But," I added, raising a finger, "I need to see the original will, not a copy. If I am signing away my rights, I want to see the actual ink on the paper. I want closure." Linda nodded eagerly. "We can meet the notary this weekend. He has the original document. We can settle this on Saturday." I walked out of the house, feeling the cold night air on my face. I had bought myself time. As I reached my car, my phone pinged with a new email notification. It was from a sender with a scrambled alphanumeric address. I opened it. The message was one line. "If you dig deep, you will lose everything." I sat in the glow of my laptop screen in the hotel room, dissecting the anonymous email. The sender had used a routing service to mask their location, a common tool for people who want to be brave without consequences. However, amateur hackers often forget that behavior patterns are harder to hide than IP addresses. The email arrived at 11:42 at night. I switched tabs to Instagram. At 11:43, exactly 1 minute later, Ethan had posted a story. It was a black screen with white text that read, "Sleepless nights worrying about family." The synchronization was not a coincidence. It was a digital fingerprint. I opened my work software, treating my own bloodline like a hostile corporate takeover. I engaged the skills I had honed at Northbridge Analytics to build a financial timeline. It started with the fraudulent loan taken out in my name 13 years ago. The money from that loan went into Dad's personal account, then immediately out to pay off a supplier lien. Fast forward to the present. I traced a pattern of small, structured withdrawals from my parents' retirement accounts. They were flowing into a generic consulting firm. A quick cross-reference showed that this firm shared a registered agent and a mailing address with Ethan's non-existent logistics company. It was a perfect circle. They had stolen from my future to fund his fake success, and now they were funneling their remaining assets to him to hide them from me. I decided to pull the trigger on a trap. I dialed Ethan's number. "Hello," he answered, sounding guarded. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice trembling slightly, simulating defeat. "I am tired. I think I just want to sign the waiver and go back to Columbus. I want to make peace." The tension on the line snapped instantly. He let out a breath he must have been holding for days. "That is smart." "Morgan," he said, his tone shifting to a patronizing warmth. "I am going to move Mom and Dad in with me once the business takes off. I am taking care of everything. You do not get a share because, well, you were never loyal to the vision. Is that it?" I asked softly. "Just loyalty. If you get a share, they will see you are the one to be proud of." Ethan blurted out, his voice cracking. "And I cannot have that. I am the son." He hung up, unaware that he had just admitted his motive was not financial necessity, but a desperate need to maintain a hierarchy where he remained on top. He was terrified of being average. The next morning, I met them at the address Linda had provided for the notary. It was in a run-down strip mall, sandwiched between a discount vape shop and a nail salon. The sign on the door was a printed piece of paper taped to the glass. Inside, the room smelled of stale coffee. The notary was a man in a wrinkled shirt who refused to make eye contact. A license hung on the wall, tilted at a 45-degree angle. He slid a document across the cheap plastic table. "Sign right here, Madison," he said, pointing a grubby finger at the signature line. I froze. He blinked, realizing his mistake. "I mean, Morgan," he corrected quickly, sweat beading on his upper lip. I looked at the paper. It was a template. He had likely run this same scam for another family recently and forgot to clear the mental cache. This was not a legal proceeding. It was theater. I pulled my phone out and stood up. "I am sorry," I said, my voice ice cold. "Given the confusion regarding my identity, I cannot sign this without my personal counsel reviewing the document first." Linda slammed her hand on the table. Her face went from composed to purple in a second. She grabbed her phone and typed furiously. My pocket buzzed. I looked down. "It is over between us." It was the same text as before. It was not a heartbreak. It was a command code. She was trying to initiate the sequence where I retreated in tears. I did not reply. I walked out to my car and forwarded the entire folder the audio recording of Ethan, the timeline of the money laundering, and the photos of the fake notary office to a ruthless probate attorney in Cleveland. Then I sent a message to Tessa. Green light. Prepare the story on estate fraud in small towns. That night, I parked my car across the street from the First Methodist Church. This was the stage where my parents had performed the play of the perfect family for 3 decades. I watched the stained glass windows dark against the night sky. I finally understood the currency they traded in. It was not dollars. It was reputation. They were not afraid of losing the money to me. They were terrified that the congregation, the neighbors, and the town would find out that the saints of Riverstead were actually thieves. And I was about to turn on the lights. Small towns do not need internet to spread news. They operate on a whisper network that travels faster than fiber optics. By Tuesday, Riverstead was buzzing with the story Linda had carefully planted. The narrative was simple and effective. I was the greedy, city slicker daughter who had abandoned the family for a decade, only to swoop back in like a vulture the moment she smelled an inheritance. I saw it in the way the cashier at the grocery store avoided my eyes. I heard it in the hushed tones of the church ladies who stopped talking when I walked past the bakery. Linda was playing the martyr, weeping into her handkerchief about how I was trying to bankrupt my poor brother. I did not scream. I did not post a defense on Facebook. I rented the community room at the public library. I printed flyers for a free workshop titled Protecting Your Assets: How to Spot Financial Fraud Within the Family. I listed the organizer as a generic community outreach fund that did not exist. I expected 5 people, but when I walked in at 6 in the evening on Thursday, the room was packed, 40 chairs were filled. Gossip had done the marketing for me. They came to see the drama, but I gave them a seminar. I stood at the podium, dressed in my sharpest Northbridge Analytics blazer. I clicked a remote, and a slide appeared showing a magnified signature. One of the most common forms of elder abuse is not physical, I said, my voice projecting clearly. It is the diversion of assets. It is the signature that looks just a little too shaky, or perhaps too perfect. I looked out at the crowd. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the town gossip, leaning forward. Sometimes, I continued, locking eyes with a woman who was one of Linda's best friends. A family member will use guilt. They will say a loan is for an emergency. They will say a document is just a formality. They will count on the fact that you love them too much to check the math, but love is not a valid form of currency in a bank. The room was silent. I was dissecting my own life, laying my parents' crimes on the table under the guise of education. I never mentioned Mark or Linda. I did not have to. The uncomfortable shifting in the seats told me that everyone connected the dots. At the end of the session, people shuffled out, avoiding me. But one man lingered. He was older, wearing a faded windbreaker and clutching a reusable grocery bag. I recognized him. It was Mr. Henderson, the accountant who had handled my father's books for 20 years before he abruptly retired. He walked up to the podium as I was packing my laptop. He did not say a word. He just pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand and walked out. I waited until I was in my car to open it. I am tired of lying. Meet me tonight. The meeting place was the far corner of the Supermart parking lot at 9 o'clock. It was a cliché straight out of a noir film, but in Riverstead, it was just the only place without streetlights. Mr. Henderson was waiting in his sedan. I got into the passenger seat. He handed me a thick folder of photocopied ledger pages. "Look at the dates," he said, his voice raspy. I flipped through the pages. My finger traced a column of numbers. 12 years ago, 10 years ago, 8 years ago. There were accounts opened in my name, savings accounts, credit lines, even a small business loan. "They used your social security number," Henderson said. "Mark had bad credit. Linda had maxed out her cards. You were the only one with a clean history. They opened these accounts, maxed them out to pay for the house repairs and Ethan's car, and then paid the minimums to keep them from defaulting. You were not just a daughter, Morgan. You were a line of credit." I sat there, staring at the numbers written in my father's handwriting. A cold realization settled in my chest, heavier than anger. It was not just favoritism. It was utility. They liked Ethan because he fed their ego. They kept me around, or at least kept my identity active, because I fed their bank account. I was a tool. I was useful because I was distant and I trusted them. Suddenly, headlights swept across the dashboard. A vehicle turned into the row, moving slowly. It was a cherry red pickup truck. "Ethan, he knows," Henderson whispered, panic rising in his voice. "Get out. I cannot be seen with you." I grabbed the folder and slipped out of the car. Henderson peeled away, his tires screeching on the asphalt. The red truck idled at the end of the row, the engine rumbling like a growl. He did not chase me. He just sat there, watching, letting me know that I was being hunted. I drove back to my hotel, my hands steady on the wheel. I was done reacting. I was done being the victim or the tool. I was going to dismantle them. I would not slash tires or scream in the front yard. I would use the law. I would use every fraudulent signature, every stolen identity point, and every lie they had told, and I would let the weight of their own actions crush the house they had built. My phone rang. It was the lawyer I had hired in Cleveland. "Morgan," he said, his tone urgent. "I have reviewed the documents you sent. We have clear evidence of forgery. We can nail them on that, but there is something else." "What is it?" I asked. "The forgery?" "It is sloppy," the lawyer said. "It is almost too obvious. I dug into the property records you sent. Morgan, the will might just be a cover. They are not trying to hide the house. They are trying to hide what the house is sitting on." A loud knock on my hotel room door jolted me awake at 7 in the morning. I opened it to find a stranger in a cheap windbreaker holding a thick packet of papers. "Morgan Reed?" he asked. I nodded. He shoved the papers into my chest. "You have been served." I closed the door and flipped to the front page. Ethan Reed versus Morgan Reed. It was a countersuit. He was suing me for harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. He was demanding a restraining order and monetary damages. I flipped to the evidence section, labeled Exhibit A. It was a screenshot of a text message conversation. The sender was listed as Morgan, and the phone number matched mine. The text read, "If you do not cut me a check for $50,000 by Friday, I am going to ruin your business reputation. I will tell everyone about the warehouse." I stared at the paper. I had never sent that message. They had fabricated digital evidence. I opened my laptop and connected to the Northbridge Analytics secure server. I had a friend in our internal cybersecurity department, a guy who lived for exposing digital fakes. I sent him the screenshot and the timestamp. "Run a metadata analysis on this," I typed. "I suspect a spoofing service." While I waited, my phone rang. It was Linda. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I needed to hear her voice. I needed to gauge the performance. "Morgan," she sobbed the moment I answered. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to destroy this family?" Her voice was thick with manufactured grief. "What family?" I asked, my voice flat. "The family that forged my signature. The family that only remembers I exist when they need a scapegoat or a loan." "We protected you," she screamed, the sob vanishing instantly. "We raised you." "You used me," I corrected. "And now you are framing me." I hung up. Then it clicked. The text message she sent earlier. "It is over between us" was not an emotional outburst. It was a strategic plant. She had sent it to establish a timeline of estrangement, to paint me as a hostile outsider before they filed the lawsuit. Linda was not just a passive participant. She was the architect. My computer chimed. The report from Northbridge was back. The text message had not originated from my phone. It came from a web-based SMS spoofing service, the kind teenagers use to prank call, but the IP address traced back to a residential router in Riverstead. My parents' router. I forwarded the report to my lawyer in Cleveland. He called me 10 minutes later. "Morgan, this spoofing proof kills their lawsuit," he said. "But I found something else. I was digging into the property deeds like you asked. There is a lien on the house, but it is not from a bank." "Who is it from?" I asked. "It is a holding structure for a trust," he said. "Morgan, your parents do not technically own that house. They are trustees. They are just holding it. Holding it for who? For the beneficiary," he said. "I am still tracking down the trust documents, but this is tied to an old workers' compensation settlement. Did your father have an accident at the chemical plant in '98? My blood ran cold. I remembered that year. Dad had been a foreman during a chemical spill. There were lawsuits. I thought they had settled for peanuts. I went back to the metal box I had taken from the shed. I dug to the bottom and found a small, black voice recorder I had missed earlier. It was old, the kind that used microcassettes. I found a pair of batteries in the TV remote and popped them in. I pressed play. Ruth's voice, younger and stronger than I remembered, filled the room. "Mark is trying to hide the settlement papers. He thinks I do not know. If they ever push you out of the will, Morgan, you have to remember, They are not just hiding the house. They are hiding something bigger than money. They are hiding your name. I let the tape spin into silence. My lawyer sent a ping to my inbox. He had found the filing, the Riverstead Industrial Accident Victim Trust. The principal amount was $3 million. It was a settlement for long-term health monitoring and damages. But because the victims were exposed to toxins that could cause genetic defects in their offspring, the bulk of the money was not for the workers. It was for their children. I looked at the document on my screen. The primary beneficiary was listed clearly. It was not Ethan. He was born after the settlement was finalized. The beneficiary was Morgan Reed. I sat back in my chair, the room spinning, the house, the savings. The inheritance they were fighting so dirty to keep it was all crumbs. They were trying to scare me away with a few $1,000s because they were terrified I would find out that I owned the whole damn bakery. They had spent 30 years living off a fortune that was legally mine. The week leading up to the hearing was a blur of caffeine and printer ink. My hotel room looked less like a place to sleep and more like a tactical command center. I had taped a timeline across the wall, connecting the dots between the chemical spill settlement in 1998, the fraudulent loan in 2012, and the spoofed text messages from last week. I had a forensic handwriting expert flying in from Chicago to testify about the discrepancies in the will. I had the trust documents proving I was the sole beneficiary of $3 million. Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, proofreading her article. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, connecting the logistics company to a known money laundering network. "I am ready to hit publish," Tessa said, tapping her laptop. "But I am waiting. If I drop this before the judge sees the evidence, they could claim media bias or sue for libel to stall the proceedings. We wait for the gavel." I nodded. I needed to look my father in the eye before the court date. I met Mark at a diner on the outskirts of town. He looked 10 years older than he had last week. He kept folding and unfolding a paper napkin. "I just wanted to keep things quiet," Mark said, refusing to look at me. "Your mother. She worries. I did what I had to do to keep the peace." "Peace?" I asked, my voice low. "You stole my identity. You stole a settlement meant to pay for my medical future. That is not peace. Dad, that is theft." "It was just money," he muttered. "You did not need it. You were always so independent. Ethan, he needs help." I left him there with his shredded napkin. He did not understand. To him, keeping the peace meant keeping his secrets buried, even if I was the one suffocating. Later that afternoon, Ethan texted me. "Meet me. Alone. Please." We met in his truck, parked behind the old high school stadium. He looked terrified. His bravado from the house was gone, replaced by the shaking hands of a child who broke a vase. I do not know what is going on." "Morgan," Ethan said, gripping the steering wheel. "Mom is acting crazy. She keeps telling me to memorize a script for the judge. She says if I mess up, I go to jail." Is that true?" I looked at him. He was 30 years old, but he was still a pawn. "If you lie under oath, yes," I said. "They are using you, Ethan. They put the fake company in your name. If the police look into the money laundering, who do you think they will arrest to the retirees or the CEO?" Ethan turned pale. "I never signed up for that. I just wanted the truck." "I can help you," I said. "You testify to the truth about the signature and the spoofing. In exchange, I will direct my civil suit only at the actions taken by Mark and Linda. I will leave your future out of it." He looked at me, tears forming in his eyes. I need to think." As I walked back to my rental car, my phone rang. It was a blocked number. Ethan must not speak. A synthesized voice rasped. "If you force him, you will lose your job." The line went dead. 2 hours later, I received an urgent calendar invite from the Human Resources Director at Northbridge Analytics. The subject line was Ethics Complaint, Immediate Review. I dialed into the video call. The HR director and a legal compliance officer were on the screen, looking grave. "Ms. Reed, we received an anonymous whistleblower complaint," the director said. "It alleges that you have been using proprietary Northbridge software to access private financial records of individuals without their consent for a personal vendetta. This is a termination-level offense." My heart hammered, but my face remained stone. I had anticipated this. Linda knew where I worked. She knew my weak point was my career. "Check the access logs," I said calmly. "I anticipate you have them open. Check the device ID." The compliance officer typed for a moment, then frowned. "The activity came from a personal laptop," the officer said, "and the software used. It is open-source forensic accounting tools." "It is not our proprietary tech. I kept my investigation strictly on personal devices and off company time," I said. "This complaint is a fabrication filed by the defendants in a pending legal case to intimidate a witness. By filing this false report, they have just given me evidence of harassment." The HR director's face softened into relief, then hardened into anger on my behalf. "We will mark this complaint as malicious and unfounded. You are cleared, Morgan." I hung up, my hands trembling slightly. They had tried to nuke my life, and they had missed. My phone buzzed again. It was Linda. "You win, and you have no family." It was the ultimate threat, the button she had installed in my psyche since birth. Obey, or be an orphan. I typed back 4 words, my thumb hitting the screen with finality. I need the truth. The day of the hearing. The air in the small county courthouse was thick enough to choke on. Linda had turned the gallery into a spectacle. She arrived flanked by 3 elderly women from the First Methodist Church Altar Guild, all of them dressed in Sunday best, glaring at me as if I were a vandal who had spray-painted the nativity scene. They were her character witnesses, living props designed to paint me as the ungrateful, city-dwelling destroyer of a wholesome family unit. My lawyer, a sharp man from Cleveland named Mr. Vance, ignored the theatrics. He approached the bench with the precision of a surgeon. He did not scream or pound the table. He simply laid out the timeline we had constructed. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice calm. "We are not here to debate family dynamics. We are here to address 3 facts. First, the signature on the will currently in probate does not match Mark Reed's historical signature samples. Second, the text messages submitted by the defense alleging extortion were spoofed from the defendant's own IP address. And third, the assets in question are not rightfully the property of the parents, but belong to a trust established in 1998 for the plaintiff, Morgan Reed, the judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked over the documents. Then she looked at the defense table. "Call your witness," she said. Ethan stood up. My stomach tightened. I had offered him a lifeline in the truck. I had given him a way out. He walked to the stand, his suit looking a size too big for him. He sat down and avoided my eyes, staring fixedly at the back of the courtroom. "Ethan," the defense attorney asked, "did your sister ever threaten you regarding the estate?" Ethan took a shaky breath. He glanced at Linda, who gave him a subtle, steel-eyed nod. "Yes," Ethan said, his voice monotone. She has always been jealous. She told me she would ruin us if we did not pay her. She has hated us since we were kids." A murmur went through the church ladies behind me. I felt the air leave my lungs. He had chosen. He was going to perjure himself to protect the lie. Mr. Vance stood up for the cross-examination. He held up his phone. "Mr. Reed," Vance said, "did you leave a voicemail for your sister at 11:30 last night?" Ethan froze. I do not recall." "Let me refresh your memory," Vance said. He pressed play on the audio file connected to the courtroom speakers. Ethan's voice, cracked and terrified, filled the room. "Moms says I have to lie. She says if I do not say what she wrote down, I go to jail for the company stuff. Morgan, I am scared." Mommy told me to say you are crazy. The silence that followed was absolute. Linda's face drained of color. Ethan put his head in his hands. I stood up, disregarding proper protocol. I looked directly at my brother. Ethan, I said softly, you are not my enemy. You are proof that I tried to stay silent for years just to keep the peace. The judge banged her gavel, but the damage was done. She turned her glare to the defense table. Counsel, the judge said, I have 2 wills in front of me. One leaves everything to the son. One splits it. Both are notarized, but the dates and stamps show irregularities. I want the original document. Now! Linda stood up, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. We do not have it, Your Honor, Linda stammered. There was a leak in the basement last week. The box was water damaged. The original is lost. I signaled to Vance. He handed the judge a glossy photograph. Your Honor, Vance said, this is a still image taken yesterday afternoon. It shows Mr. Mark Reed opening a dry, undamaged safe in the front hallway. You can clearly see the document inside. Linda looked at the photo and gasped. It was from their own security system. The expensive video doorbell she had installed and bragged about to the neighbors for security, the one that recorded the interior foyer as well as the porch, had captured Mark checking the documents before they left for the lawyer's office. Her own paranoia had recorded her lie. That is impossible, Mark whispered, his face turning gray. The timestamp is yesterday at 4 p.m., the judge said, her voice like ice. Mr. Reed, I am ordering court security to accompany you to your residence immediately to retrieve the contents of that safe. If it is not there, I will hold you in contempt. Mark turned to look at me. For the first time in my life, I did not see the dismissal or the arrogance he usually wore. I saw fear. He looked at me like I was a stranger, someone he had underestimated so severely that he was only now realizing the danger. He wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at the person who finally saw everything. The safe was opened in the judge's chambers under the watchful eye of a court-appointed bailiff. When the heavy metal door swung open, it did not just reveal the original will. It revealed the architecture of a 30-year lie. Inside, stacked neatly beside the last will and testament, were the documents for the Riverstead Industrial Accident Victim Trust and a series of transfer deeds that had clearly been forged. The room was silent as the judge reviewed the papers. The twist was not that they had stolen the money from me. The twist was that the money had never belonged to them in the first place. The trust was established in my name. Because my Social Security number had been used to secure the initial settlement due to the potential genetic impact clause of the lawsuit, I was the primary beneficiary. My parents had been frantically trying to cut me out of the will, not because they wanted to give their money to Ethan, but because they were terrified I would gain access to the trust and realize they had been draining my money to fund their lifestyle. Mark crumbled. He did not cry. He just deflated like a punctured tire. Under the relentless questioning of the judge, he confessed. We knew Morgan would look at the numbers, Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. She works in fraud detection. If she saw the accounts, she would know. We had to push her out. We had to make her leave. Ethan does not ask questions. He just wanted the truck. It was a brutal admission. They had not chosen Ethan out of love. They had chosen him because he was useful. Then the judge turned to Linda regarding the text message. Under oath, the facade of the grieving mother cracked. She admitted that "it is over between us" was not a reaction to a fight. It was a calculated move to create a paper trail of estrangement, hoping that if I sued, they could claim I had abandoned the family and therefore had no claim to the estate. It was a legal maneuver disguised as heartbreak. That was the breaking point for Ethan. He stood up, his face red and wet with tears, and shouted over his own lawyer. She told me to sign it, Ethan yelled, pointing a trembling finger at our mother. She said if I did not sign the affidavit and spoof the texts, I would lose everything. She promised me a real share if I kept Morgan out. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged the gavel, her face set in stone. She issued an emergency ruling immediately. All family assets were frozen. The case was referred to the district attorney for a criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The countersuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, citing systemic harassment and fabrication of evidence. As the bailiff moved to escort my parents out for processing, I checked my phone. Tessa had hit publish. The article went live the moment the gavel fell. It was not a tabloid piece. It was a dry, forensic dismantling of the perfect family myth, exposing the fake logistics company and the stolen trust fund. The court of public opinion would be far less merciful than the judge. My phone buzzed one last time with a text from Linda. She was sitting only 10 feet away, but she could not look at me. "You won." I looked at the screen. I typed my final reply. I only stopped losing. I blocked the number. I blocked Mark. I blocked Ethan. I did not go out for a celebratory dinner. I did not gloat. When the funds were eventually released to me, I took a portion of the settlement and established a grant for the Riverstead Public Library. I named it the Ruth Delaney Truth in Literacy Fund. She was the one who had given me the key to the lockbox, and it felt right that her name would be the one attached to the only clean money in this entire mess. I packed my rental car and drove out of Riverstead as the sun was setting. I passed the First Methodist Church, the place where they used to parade Ethan around like a trophy. I thought about the empty chair at the dinner table, the one I had feared for so long, for years. I thought they had kicked me out of my seat. Now I realized the truth. I was not kicked out. I had escaped. As I merged onto the highway, watching the town fade in the rearview mirror, I realized I was not leaving a home. I was leaving a crime scene. And for the first time in my life, the road ahead belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Morgan's decision. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Mira Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.